So now we have David Bradley giving a presentation on modality and Lisu.
We can't hear you.
We can't hear you, David.
Sorry, I didn't know if I was the only one who couldn't hear.
Okay, let's try again.
Okay.
I'll leave my video off because my internet is pretty bad at the moment. But firstly, let me start by saying that my internet may break up, so my apologies. The terminology that I'm using is basically fairly standard typological terminology, but the categories that I'm referring to are actually categories that exist as slots in Lisu. So they may differ across languages. Lisu is, of course, as most of you know, a language spoken in southwestern China, northeastern Burma, northern Thailand, and a bit in northeastern India, which is one of the Hui or Yi branch or Loloish languages, with a complex system of posthead, versatile verb modals. Most of these modals are one syllable, some of them are two syllables, and most of the two syllable modals behave as units syntactically, but one does not, and I'll show you how that is. And there are some dialect differences. In a few cases, these forms can be related to homophonous verbs, but others have no obvious verbal counterparts. And in many cases, these forms have cognates, whether they have modal meanings with or without the same syntactic pattern or not, may differ. Now my screen won't move. Okay. In the syntax of Lisu, one interesting property of this slot of what I'm calling modals, because most of them have modal type meanings, all can be directly negated by a preceding negation marker ma. And this, of course, has widespread Tibeto-Burman cognates. The negation on a modal following a verb cannot be on the verb, it must be on the modal. The prohibitive marker ta, which again has widespread Tibeto-Burman cognates, does not co-occur with a modal. Modals, unlike some other verbs, occur in polar questions with a form modal, not modal. And verbs can do this, and some verbs don't, but many verbs can. And those that can do it much less frequently than modals. Another interesting property of these forms is that they occur with their modal meaning as the head element of a clause, either answering a question, which had that modal in it, and also when the verb is present in the context. So here are some examples. This slot are elicited. So the first example, jemada, I am not allowed to go. You can see the negative is between the verb and the modal. The other way around, majida, is ungrammatical. Polar question, you can ask it either with modal, not modal, or with a final question marker. You cannot do the questioning by reduplicating the verb. And answering those questions, or in enough context, the modal alone is sufficient as a full clause, with or without its negation. As I said, some of the modals have two syllables, but they operate as units. So, jenata, I must go, northern or southern dialect, or jemabala, I haven't got the time to go now, it's not possible for me to go now, which is the, oh, I see that, sorry, the translation is wrong. There should be a not here, which is only in central and literary Lisu. The only modal that's got two syllables in this modal slot that's posthead verb that doesn't operate as a unit is the modal of desire, want to. And this has a heart plus verb structure. It contains the noun heart, ni, and then a verb shi, which means long. And then when it's negated, the negation comes before the verb, as it does when you have any other kind of heart plus verb sequence. The negation comes between the noun and the verb. So in this one heart or liver structure only, it is occasionally possible that you can put the negation here. That is, you can say je manisha, but speakers will usually reject this if they are presented with it as a question of grammaticality. You do hear it occasionally in some informal speech. This modal, the verb of the desire verb, has an interesting property in that it is unrelated to the form of any of the modals in any of the other closely related languages. So I'll be giving examples from Lahu, Nosu, Katso, and Aka. And also, the structures that these occur in are different. So in the case of Lahu, for example, ga is a posthead verb, but it is not in the modal category. It is not in what Matisoff calls the caudal category. It is closer to the head verb in a slot that's immediately after the head verb. In Nosu, chi, in Katso, unlike the other languages, this desire modal precedes the head verb. And in Aka, well, perhaps cognate with Katso, it follows. So the forms and syntax of these are different. And if we look at how they're negated in these other four languages, we'll see that they're also negated differently. So in Lahu, you have to negate the verb. You cannot negate the wanting form. In Nosu, as in Lisu, you negate the modal. It comes immediately before the modal. In Katso, you also negate the modal, but in this case, the modal being before the verb means that the negative is before the entire verbal elements. And then in Aka, as in Nosu and Lisu, the negation comes between the verb and the wanting form. If we look at, for example, Burmese, this is spoken Burmese, and the forms are given with their voiced forms in juncture. The modals in Burmese don't take negation. So the negation goes on the verb. Thwajinda, mathwajinbu, or in literary Burmese, thwajinthi and mathwajin. So again, the syntax is different and the forms are different. Another interesting thing about wanting something is that in Lisu you have a separate verb nu, which is the verb for wanting something, but this is almost never followed by the modal of desire, nisha. In the other languages that I've mentioned before, you need some other kind of verb in addition to the modal of desire or the form of representing desire, and this is different in different languages. In Nosu, there is a distinct verb, ka, which means to want or desire. So that's, again, a parallel between Nosu and Lisu. I'm going to talk about three categories of modals, modals of potential. And again, I think we have to be careful about glossing because the glosses represent a kind of package, and each verb in each language has a slightly different semantic package. So Leipzig glosses are all very well, but they don't really accurately represent the semantics of a form in a particular language. So we have a form da, which is something that's permitted and appropriate, has a homophonous verb to cure. We have a verb, a modal na, which is permitted and possible, not necessarily appropriate, not used in literary Lisu. We have a modal bala, which is a two-syllable modal where the negation comes before the whole thing, possible at the time, only found in central and literary Lisu. We have a modal ku, which has meaning able to do something well, a modal ku, which means barely able to do something, not used in literary, a modal de, which is fitting, acceptable, suitable, usually collocated with verbs of eating or drinking, also sometimes others, and very infrequent, and a modal chi, which is something which is culturally appropriate or proper. Then you have a number of deontic modals, the must forms, must and should and so forth. Here we have nata and naka, which are Northern Central dialect versus Central Literary dialect. We have chu, which is Northern and Central dialect, or chu, which is Southern dialect for should. And then we have tso for need to. Another way of doing deontic, that is saying must, is to have a doubly negated verb and negated da. And I'll come back to that in a moment because it's interesting that this one doubly negated form also occurs in a number of other closely related languages. Then there is a third subset of semantic subset of modals, which are not always classified as modals, but they occur in this slot in this language. So we have the verb wa, get to. We have a verb, a modal pu, which means to dare to. There's no such related verb. The verb with the same meaning is completely different. We have a verb ko, which is to be usual to. We have a verb zo, which is to have the experience of, what Jim has called experiential, which is found in Northern and Southern dialect, and relates to a verb to take turns. And then we have a verb go, which is, I think, borrowed from Chinese guo, because it's more frequent in the dialects that have more contact with Chinese. And we have a form yi, try to do something, which is relatable to a verb to look. Now, the semantics here have changed quite a bit. If we look at cognates, the may form da has nosu cognates and katso cognates. The can form na has nosu cognate na. The skillful form has a lahu cognate bu, which shows the fact that lahu sometimes gets bilabials when you have a velar plus medial w. The wa form get has lots of cognates all over. The experiential form zo has cognates like nosu, zo, or lahu jo, and others. The der form bu has a nosu cognate bu, and so forth. Then, apart from the modals, the Posthead slot that contains modals and these other elements, we have other categories, and these are different categories which have different memberships. A set of resultatives, which is fairly large, and a set of manner forms, which is a bit smaller. So, for example, nya, to have had one's fill of, bo, to have amply enough of, qua, to do in an unskillful way, relatable perhaps to the verb to be bitter, and ga, to do something for fun, which can be related perhaps to the first syllable of words like kanya or kachi, to play and to be happy. When you negate the resultatives, the negation, as with the modal slot, the resultative gets the negation itself. But when you negate a manner verb, like a manner form like ka, the negation goes on the head verb. So here again, the syntax of these is different, not just between Lisu and other languages, but also between the resultative slot, which comes first, and the manner slot, which comes second. We have, from here on, these are all text examples. You can get sequences where a resultative is followed by a modal. So here we have, I've had the experience of taking it and getting it. A manner plus a modal, and when you negate that, of course, as in the case of the modal without the manner form, the negative goes there. I'm seeing my internet connection unstable. Sometimes there's ambiguity between a resultative reading and a modal type meaning. So the verb wa is both a resultative and get, and also a modal get to do something. So wa to wow means either I trapped and got it, or I got to trap it. When there is another resultative, which is possible, a sequence of two resultatives, you cannot get the modal meaning. because the y is then separated from the slot where the modal would have to be.
5 minutes remaining.
Thank you. I'll skip this slide because you all know this, that the verb to look grammaticalizes into a modal, meaning to try to. I'll be looking at quickly at data from 6 different kinds of text, a literary Lisu story, oral Northern Lisu story, traditional Northern Weishi Lisu texts, central Lisu stories, a literary translation of the chapters 1 to 10 of Matthew, and Southern Lisu folk stories. So very quickly, as you can see, some of these modals, some of these forms are relatively infrequent, like G and D, of course, in this.
Looks like we might have lost the connection. Evelyn, can you get in contact with him?
Sure, yeah, let me
Thanks.
see about that.
I'll go ahead and post his slides again for reference. Okay. And we actually can't hear you right now.
Dr. Bradley, could you unmute yourself?
I don't think he's muted.
I think he's back. Here we go.
I just
He's
unmuted him.
here.
Cool.
Yeah, he's unmuted.
Maybe he lost. No, we're still moving.
It might be the
It's the internet.
The internet, the connection
Yeah.
may be not
Yeah.
good. Let's see what's on the chat.
Because yeah, it shows that yeah, he's sharing and his mic is on.
Okay, let me send him an email maybe.
Now my screen is frozen.
Oh, we can hear you again.
Okay, so can I start again? I'm probably over time, so I'll be very brief. You can see that the frequency of these things differs, that one form is only present in central and literary dialect with a few scattered occurrences in where a literate speaker is writing in another dialect. That the Bible dialect lacks some modals altogether, as is often the case, that Bible dialects have a limited range of forms within complex systems like modality, epistemicity, and evidentiality. Can you hear me? My
Yes,
screen is
yes, we can.
freezing.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I'll just perhaps very briefly mention that these other modals are also infrequent, but these are percentage uses. The central and literary use naka, and the other two use nata. My screen is frozen. in addition to these structures with the possibility of modal plus of verb plus modal, verb plus negative plus modal, we also have a few examples of structures where you have just the modal plus a nominalizer. This is possible in all dialects. These are text examples taken out of text. If we look across the 6 data sources, we can see that we have relatively few of these. One of the reasons that they're a bit more frequent in this northern text is that it's quite literary, and this Bible text is, of course, quite literary. The other interesting example, the frequent use of a bare modal in the literary data is due to the fact that this is the book of Matthew, chapters 1 to 10, in which in chapters 8 and 9, Jesus is healing the sick, and therefore in the first of a series of healing events, there's the verb to heal and then a modal, and then in the second of the, and the third and the fourth of the healing events in a sequence, you have just the modal. So that's why this number is higher. Otherwise, bare modals without a preceding verb are fairly infrequent. I said I would talk very briefly, and it will be brief because I'm virtually out of time. The modal may, da, has the interesting property that when you negate the head verb and the modal, maje, mada, this has a deontic meaning. I must go. Whereas with other modals, you can't do that. You have to nominalize the clause and then say not the case. Interestingly, the same exact parallel structure, ma plus verb plus mata, a plus verb pa a plus ahe, and ma plus verb for ma plus mape in Katso, Nasu, Lahu are all exactly the same. They're unusual in that you can negate both the verb and the modal, and that they all have this deontic meaning. Lahu is interesting and different in that it has also a further possibility with the counterpart of Lisu, ku, to be able to do with difficulty. Makai, maga, I can hardly go. I'm not able to go with difficulty at all. I must not go. In terms of sequences, the modals occur in a number of different sequences. You have the head verb, then you have a resultative, then you have a manner, then you have a negation, then you have a modal. After the modal, in a final clause, you can have directionals, time tense aspect, imperatives, epistemics, evidentials, and like the previous paper, I prefer to combine these two categories. And finally, politeness markers. And last of all, in the final clause, the reported speech marker jo, or dialect forms do or zo. In non-final clauses, most of this stuff after the modal does not occur. And you instead have just a non-final clause marker. So the bottom line is, these are interesting, and they have a number of properties that they share with other languages that are most closely related, but in other ways they differ. So thank you very much. And let me thank also my Lisu friends, Chris and Kwei Li for Katso information, Husu Hua for Nosu, and Upai Chasa on Lahu. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your talk. We have about 6 minutes before the next talk starts, so we do have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions.
Question.
Yeah. Jim, yeah, go ahead.
Very nice paper, David. I enjoyed it a lot. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I have a couple of etymological suggestions. That form na, permitted and possible, I think it could well be related to lahu na, to be good for something, like jan na, to be good to eat, to be edible. It seems like a good match. I gloss it as good, virtuous, proper, na, navi. Another one, that one to do for fun, ga. It looks a little like the first syllable, to to dance, that'd be like to kick for fun, or kamuve, to expel breath for fun. On the other hand, there's a good root, ga, to sing. So maybe that one doesn't work. But in kaketve, I kind of like that one. Also, finally,
I think perhaps the ka is, as you say, the first syllable of kamu and kake, and it is cognate perhaps with the form that also means sing or dance in Burmese. And
yeah, it all goes together. Yeah,
singing and dancing are great fun.
Yeah. Another thing I was interested in seeing was your comparing gu skillful with lahu pu. That would be like a fourth example of lahu labials to velars and other Loloish languages. How's the vowel correspondence? U and u.
Well, the vowel correspondence is fine, and the tone correspondence is fine because the lahu 3-5 corresponds to Lisu 5-5 when it's got a glottal prefix.
Great, well, that's another example. We can add it to comb.
It's like nest and comb and several others.
Yeah.
This one, unlike the others, this one is unaspirated.
Yes. Well, that's against
comb is unaspirated too, yeah. But so it means the same is also true, for example, for some other. There are a few other etymologies like that.
Yeah, I think it's a pre-glottalized initial anyway, because the lahu has a high rising tone.
Yes, exactly. That's why the Lisu has a 5-5.
Yeah. Okay, nice to have that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Looks like we have a question in the chat. It's a quick one. It says, given syntactic similarity, would you be comfortable saying that Lisu want is a manner rather than a modal verb?
No, because you can have the various kinds of resultatives and manner verbs in between the head verb and the nisha. So, I don't have the examples in front of me, but for example, you could have something like ruwa nisha, I want to take and get it. So it's not in the manner slot. Of course, the manner slot, as I said before, can have two elements in it, but most of them in principle don't negate. It's only the result, sorry, I'm thinking of the resultatives, yeah, the manner slot. No, I don't think it's in the manner slot. But it's a thought, yes, thank you.
And we have about 2 more minutes. Our next speaker, Chris, if you want to get ready or prepared, we might have time for one more quick question. All right. Given that, then, I'd like to thank David Bradley one more time for his talk. Thank you.